Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to part 4 of Woodburn Accountants and Advisors webinar series on, I have actually misplaced the slides. I should actually be going to the beginning. Apologies for that. About getting ahead of the growth opportunity in China. Just to give you a bit of a reflection of what we've spoken on in the last 3 days, we have talked about getting the fundamental basics completed so that companies can focus on the growth opportunity that is in China, get ahead of the game, get ahead of their competitors who unfortunately and now in today's age are still making mistakes in the Chinese market, particularly surrounding the administrative and compliance functions around their company. So on Monday, we were talking about trademark registrations, brand protection. On Tuesday, we were talking about what it takes to set up a company in China, what are the key decisions that have to be made. And yesterday, we were looking at how to communicate, how to start your business with your Chinese accountant and how much value needs to be placed in that individual. And today, we're going to look at how to recruit your first hires, how to employ those first hires. What are the key considerations for creating a sound HR foundation when going into the Chinese market? One of the biggest mistakes that I made when I first entered China was that in the first probably 5 to 6 years, over 50% of my time was spent on HR issues surrounding our organization. Not good. You should not be spending that much time on just simply HR issues. And I do know that it is an extremely big pain point for many that are going into the Chinese market. So hopefully today we can clarify that a little bit. Donalyn, you're the only one here, so I'm not going to ask you to do this again, but it's always good for me to know a little bit of background about my audience. Again, I'm always interested to know who are the newbies, the startups, as well as the experienced China hands. This is our 4th day, so the technical side is exactly the same as the last 3 days. I'm here to teach and educate you. If you've got any questions, please insert them into the chat box. From a technical standpoint, we're using Zoom meeting. If you run into any issues, just log off, log back in. For me, it takes about 1 minute to 2 minutes to reboot, and I will come back on to finish today's presentation. We are recording today's session, and the recording will hopefully be up on our YouTube channel by tomorrow, if not latest by Monday. I'm a little bit behind, apologies for that. Yesterday's session is now finally up on our YouTube channel, so bear with me, but you will be able to look at the recordings at your own convenience. I am going to be your China expert for the week, so I'm just gonna, again, reiterate who I am. My name's Christina Kohler-Colucci. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. My focus for the last 17 years has been to help foreign investors with their market entry, implementation, and growth in the Chinese market. I have 17 years of on-the-ground experience in corporate services and corporate compliance based out of Shanghai. I'm currently not in Shanghai. I'm currently in Europe due to the pandemic. The beauty of China over the last years has been the fact that a lot of the administrative and compliance functions have become more systematic. There are more procedures and processes that can be implemented, which is why I created this webinar series this week to highlight how you can take care of a lot of those compliance measures ahead of time, proactively, so that the foundation of your organization is solid as you are growing your business. We don't want to ever get into a stage when we are on our journey where we are moving 1 step forward, 3 steps back, 1 step forward, 4 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, which, trust me, a lot of foreign investors still do today. So let's get cracking on. And just again, to reiterate for those that are going to be viewing this on replay up on our YouTube channel, we launched a book on Amazon called The 9 Superpowers to Succeed in China. It was written last year. The purpose of the book is really to provide principles of doing business in China. I'm not talking about current regulations in there, current rules, because those change daily. What I'm talking about is getting you the right tools and principles in place to design your own China roadmap for your organization. And if you're interested to learn about these tools, these tips, these principles, You can purchase the book on Amazon, either hard copy or through an ebook version. So to get cracking on today's session, we are looking at how to recruit and employ your first hires in China. HR is an area where I would almost say 99.9% of all foreign investors in China suffer in some shape or form. It is a very cloudy arena because we're talking about humans. We're talking about the emotional side of humans. There is no system process available to look at how people are going to react to your business, how people are going to be within your business, whether they are going to help you grow your business. You just don't know what that human emotional attachment will be. I'm hoping that by the end of today, I will provide you with a little bit of sunshine and ray where I can give you some tools and tips on how to find people, how to select people, how to have a backup plan for people, how to employ those people, and how to create operational guidelines and management directives to give guidance to the people that are on the ground, considering that you are overseas. Now, it doesn't mean that you won't run into obstacles with the people themselves. That happens all over the world. But at least these tools and tips will protect your business, will protect the foundation of your business so that you don't have to spend, like I did, over 50% of your time dealing with HR issues. So what are the pain points from foreign investors in China when having those first hires on the ground? One is a lack of transparency about HR regulations. The second is a lack of understanding and language capabilities, particularly if you are not selecting candidates that speak fluent English, and that is the language that you are communicating within your own organization. There is a lack of communication, meaning that foreign investors don't spend enough time on the phone communicating with their China offices. As I was highlighting in yesterday's presentation, you should be speaking to your people on the ground daily. There should be a resource in the headquarters or wherever it might be that is responsible for the China business. We should be spending, another pain point is spending more money on less quality. This is always a debatable point where people feel they are spending more than they are actually getting from the individuals that they are employing. And then the last two are critical. There is a lack of trust and there is a lack of loyalty. The lack of trust comes from the foreign investors. The lack of loyalty comes from the Chinese employees that are on the ground. If the two are not in balance, then how can you expect your business to grow? There has to be trust. There has to be loyalty in order for you to build momentum and grow your organization. So the most important hires you'll make are your first employees, because they are setting the foundation. They are setting the atmosphere. They are the ones who are setting the journey for your China business. So the question is always, how do you spot a good one, right? For me, there's 4 categories I look at when interviewing or validating first employees. The 4 are generalists, having no egos, believers, and grit. And what do I mean by that? Generalists. You are setting up a startup in China. You need somebody who is flexible enough to adapt to do a variety of different business functions, because you're not going to start on day one with a sales guy, with a supply chain guy, with a purchasing guy, with an accountant, with a business development marketing person, with a general manager. You're not going to start off hiring 5, 6, 7, 10 people from day one. You won't. You'll hire 1. If you have the budget, maybe 2. And you will need these 2 individuals to be flexible, adaptable, to be willing to do a multiple of functions to help you to grow your business to a level where you can hire somebody who is a specialist in that function. But initially in your startup, you need generalists, and you need to question that in the interview. Are they willing to be flexible, adaptable to doing anything to help grow the business? You need to hire people who have no egos. And this is the issue in China, is that when you start to interview individuals that have been working for companies for over 15, 20 years, and they feel like they know the insides and outs of working for foreign investors, and they start saying, you better listen to me, I know everything. Nobody knows everything in China. It is impossible that everybody knows everything. We are learning, all of us, daily in the Chinese market. So to have somebody who puts their nose up and says, I know everything and trust me and I know how to do it, that for me is a warning sign, because that's a big ego that I do not want to manage. The next is that you have to sell your business. So you need somebody, or you need somebody's, one or two people initially, who believe in your vision, because they are going to spread your vision amongst the new employees that you're going to be hiring. You need somebody who believes in what you're going to be doing and believes that they can reach the KPIs necessary to grow the business. And that leads me to grit. You need somebody that has oomph, that has the strength, the power, the tenacity to push things forward. Not in an illegal way, mind you, but in a proper way, in a transparent way, so that there's clarity within the organization, but the organization is still growing and maintaining momentum for growth. So for me, these are 4 attributes that are so important when interviewing candidates to know, are they generalists? Do they have strong egos? Are they believers in your vision? And do they have grit? That is what you need to start up your business in China. Those are the characters that you need to build up your organization in China. So how to find the right talent in China? Where would you look to find the right talent? Okay. For me, there are 4 ways. One is to use the job search portals like 51job.com, China HR, Zhaopin. There are a whole bunch of others. There are also some specialty job portals specific to certain industries and sectors as well. The downside to these job search portals is the fact that they do require you to have an entity in China to sign their contracts. They will not sign contracts with you being an overseas entity. So you doing that yourself will be very difficult if you don't have an entity on the ground. The other is LinkedIn, which is truly undervalued in China because a lot of foreign investors make the assumption that it's blocked. It's not blocked. A lot of Chinese individuals, especially in higher roles, from minute management to senior management, are listed on LinkedIn. They have profiles on LinkedIn. So it is a great way for people that don't want to spend money on external resources to do their own searches for individuals on LinkedIn and approaching them. Then you've got social media platforms like WeChat. So spreading the word amongst your contacts and your networks, or placing a post in your messaging board to say that you're looking for a certain role, or do you know somebody that you could refer because I'm looking for somebody for this type of role. And then finally, you've obviously got the recruiters and headhunters that are out there who obviously have the experience, or should have the experience, to be able to find talent for you, vet that talent, and make sure they fulfill the criteria that you need from an attributable point of view in relation to the business. At a minimum, there are 2 things that I would require clients to do. One is do your own research, study salary guidelines, which are available on the internet free of charge and are up to date by a variety of different headhunting companies. It's just a matter of downloading the PDFs. Why do I want you to study salary guidelines? Because it is important to understand salary levels. It is important to understand how titles are displayed. Even though we're trying to look for generalists, Nobody's going to have a title called generalist, okay? So you need to look at the salary guidelines to understand how the titles correspond to years of experience, educational level, and then salary levels. And you need to create a budget. What can you afford from a financial resource perspective on people that you're looking to hire? The next thing that is critical is that you can't search for people until you yourself know what the role is and what the responsibilities are for the job in question. Okay? When you go to a headhunter or a recruiter, they're going to ask you, do you have a job description available so I can have an understanding of from your mind what you're looking for in a candidate and what actually will the candidate be doing? So if we are looking for the generalists, then we need to put that in the responsibilities list, right? We need to think of all aspects of the business that we want somebody to be able to do. We then go to the experts who will tell you, listen, you're looking for somebody who's in all of these areas. I don't think that's possible. There might be one or two areas that they're not knowledgeable on. What we have to see is whether they're adapting to the fact that they have to learn something new. Okay? But I would study, these are 2 action points that I would ask any foreign investor to do, is study the salary guidelines and create your roles and responsibilities list. All right? Because again, without that, you can't move forward. How to pick the right talent in China. So resumes in China are provided by candidates. They can also be found on the job search portals, or the recruiters, headhunters will provide them, or you may look at the LinkedIn profiles of certain candidates on LinkedIn, obviously. We always want to have the mindset in China that the resumes should be taken with a pinch of salt, and that all things that have attracted you from the resume should be verified during the interview. Okay? So if there are 1 or 2 points that are striking to you and you're like, I want to interview this candidate because of these 1 or 2 points, then you need to verify that it's true in the interview. You can always look at a person's reaction. But even if they are in senior management roles, you may want to do a background check to understand the real value behind those 2 points or 3 points that was striking to you as you were reading through those resumes. When you're doing interviews with individuals, you have to observe their demeanor. Are they shy? Are they brash? Are they harsh? Do they ask you a lot of questions? Remember, in China, times have changed. So in many instances, you are convincing these employees, these candidates, to work for your company, which is why you're looking for that believer aspect to them. Do they believe in your vision? Are they asking questions about your vision? Are they verifying your vision? If you feel just by the demeanor that it's not the right fit, then end the interview right there and then. Do not waste your time. There's no point in wasting your time. I have sat through interviews that have lasted 2 hours when I knew after 5 minutes I was never going to hire the individual. No point doing that, guys. Go by gut feeling, go by instinct, and just terminate that, after 10 minutes or so. All right. The next is that during the interview, you need to screen the candidates for their aptitude, their skill set, their attitude, and their language capabilities. Okay. Now, most of the time, you'll probably be interviewing people that are mainland Chinese. So Chinese is their Putonghua would be their number 1 mother tongue. But then you may want to test them on their English language skills, or their German language skills, or their Spanish language skills, if they are bilingual or trilingual candidates. Okay. In terms of aptitude, the most effective way to test aptitude is to create a checklist yourself of the skill sets that you are looking for in the candidate. So I was mentioning in yesterday's presentation about the skill sets needed for accountants, up-to-date tax knowledge. So you've got to ask certain questions about their tax ability and their tax knowledge level based on current tax issues. You may want to ask questions about customer experiences or supply chain experiences or how they have optimized structures. It all comes down to you creating the list for the roles and responsibilities, taking that and comparing that to what they tell you in the meeting, right? You've got to verify that they are checking off on all the skill sets that you are looking for, all right? So checklist is a perfect is a perfect way of doing that. The other is attitude, which is obviously very difficult because it's very much a personal opinion. If you are going through a process to recruit an individual and you're not the only decision maker in that process on who's going to be hired, but maybe there are 3 or 4 of you, all 3 or 4 of you might have different opinions on the attitude of the individual during the interview. Okay? It's a very personal reflection. My suggestion with attitude is that you will see things already when you're trying to organize the interview. You will see things already when they start the interview. And you will see things as the interview progresses and questions might get more and more difficult, and then how the interview ends. Okay? So for me, to give you just a couple of examples, as I'm doing recruitments for financial roles, if an individual is constantly canceling and rescheduling the interview, at some point I give up, because either they want the job or they don't. So are they a go-getter? Do they have the grit? Are they a believer in the company or not, right? If somebody's desperate for a job or is really interested to change roles, they're going to show up for that interview in the first time round. But to have somebody cancel and reschedule 3 to 4 times, annoying. I would end it. No point. No point even continuing, regardless of the resume. Okay? When you're on the interview, again, look at their demeanor. Are they shy? Are they brash? Are they harsh? How are they communicating? What are their language skill capabilities? Are they being clear? Are they being transparent? Are they being communicative? Or are they sitting reactively waiting for you to have a question? Are you having a back and forth conversation? Are you having a debate? Are you discussing experiences? You have to look at the whole picture of that interview. Okay? Now, at the moment, face-to-face interviews are not possible because you can't travel to China at the moment. That does not mean that you can't figure out the attitude of an individual through a video conferencing call. I know too many companies that are not greenlighting their China projects because they feel like they can't hire anybody by not meeting them face-to-face. That is not true. Recruitment projects have still occurred and decisions have been made by never physically meeting people. Business has to continue, guys. Okay? But you need to be able to see somebody during a conversation through a video conferencing system in order to be able to figure out the attitude and the demeanor of the candidate. I've listed here some just typical questions that I ask, and it might be very different for other companies out there. But my main role is to really get inside the head of the candidate, right? So simple, if you start off with simple questions. How big was the team that you had that worked for you? How many team members did you have? How was the reporting structure? What were the difficulties you faced dealing with a team of people? How did you manage those difficulties? Give me an example of a situation where you found it difficult, but somehow you succeeded out of it. Or give me an example of a situation that was difficult and unfortunately the solution was never found because of X, Y, and Z. What in your terms is an ideal operations management team? How would an operations management team run? How would you create that scenario? How do you solve a problem that arises? How do you act on it? Do you pause and think, or do you act immediately, or do you consult and advise with other team members? Do you have a boss that you report to? What do you think is the skill set you need to possess to be successful? What is the skill set that your team needs in order for you to be successful and for your team to be successful? Describe your management style or your philosophy around management. How was your involvement with each employee in the organization? Were you trained? Have you ever fired employees? What were the reasons for that termination? How do you motivate your team? What sort of tasks were you handling on a daily basis? How did you make decisions? And then last but not least, if I like the candidate, I will usually ask them to complete a project. And obviously the project will be different depending on the role of the candidate. But ultimately, I ask the candidate, we are a startup right now. I would love to know, if you joined our organization tomorrow, what would be your action plan for the first 3 to 6 months? Please create a presentation and let's set up a date and time where you can present that to me. Because not only are you looking at the presentation skills, you're looking to see whether they are a believer and have a vision for your organization. You're going to see by how that presentation looks, whether it took time, where they took the time themselves to create that, because it shows that they're truly interested in the organization. You will get insight on what they might need from you to be able to push this project forward, because ideally they're going to say, I need training. I need X and Y and Z before I start anything. Okay. Doing this project really does bring a lot of insight, and you can do it for absolutely any role you want. And I think it's a great way to get even further insight into the aptitude of the individual, the attitude of the individual, and ultimately whether they are able to commute in a presentation transparently, with clarity, clearly. Because you have to imagine this person may have to communicate with a variety of team members on a global scale, and you want them to be clear and transparent when they're communicating. So giving them a project to do really does give you a beautiful overview. I wouldn't do that with every candidate you're interviewing. I would do it with a select few that really are, let's say, the top 5 of your list. The next is providing you with tips on how to choose that final candidate. Okay. Now, to choose that final candidate, what you need to do as an action plan is always think about your key objectives for the next 3 years. So hopefully you've done a business plan, you've done a budget, and you know what your key objectives are for the next 12 months, 2 years, 3 years. But let's think long term. For the next 3 years, what are your key objectives? What needs doing, and which milestones need to be achieved successfully? Now look at that candidate. And do you think that candidate can achieve that success? Can hit those milestones? Okay. For point 1, those questions will be answered through the project that they will do on your behalf. The next is you might have listened to 5 different project reviews, 5 different presentations, and you might be like, oh, wow, it's tough choices now. I feel like there are maybe 2 or 3 different candidates that could be very good. As a tip, I would go into final negotiations with the top 2 or 3 candidates. Why? Because you need a backup plan. Because some candidates do change their minds at the last minute and start asking for extra benefits and all of this in regards to the package they want to receive. And you need to have a backup, and you need to make sure you're not wasting any time. So go through the final negotiations with 2 to 3 candidates, so that again, you've got backup. And at the end of the day, you've got to look at your cost benefit ratio. Look at the salary, look at the aptitude, look at the profile of the candidate, and how well does it match from a score between 1 to 10. So if you look at aptitude, how do they score 1 to 10? If you look at the cost, the package they're asking for, how does that look from a score of 1 to 10? When you're looking at communication, language abilities, what is that score from 1 to 10? You might have a list of 10 things that you want to make a score out of to understand How would this person fit into your organization? And you may want a variety of people in your company to do this exercise, because again, you might not just have one person who's doing the interview, right? And you might find out that there are different ratios for everybody, but you have to come to a conclusion at some point. And even if you can't come to a conclusion at some point, at least go through the final negotiations with 2 or 3 other candidates so that at the last minute you can make a decision. Now, I have just gone through everything in regards to how do you find those candidates, how do you select those candidates, and how do you go through those final negotiations with those candidates at the end of the day. Now comes to how do you employ those candidates? And I want to highlight here 9 critical issues in regards to the Chinese labor and employment law. All right. So the first is, can you hire in China without a legal presence? The answer is no. Every person that is residing in China needs to be employed, or if they're working, needs to be employed by a local entity. Freelance contracts are a very gray area in China. And ultimately, you cannot be employed by an overseas entity. Salary cannot be paid from overseas, because how do you pay social insurance and income tax based off of that? Very difficult. It can be done, but it is not the proper way of doing it. So there are ways of hiring people without having a legal presence, and I will touch on that in point 9. But ideally, you want to have an entity in China in order to hire these people directly and give them a sense of stability, give them a sense of that you are committed to the market. Okay. Is a written employment contract required? Yes. Written employment contracts are required. Chinese courts prefer hard copies. Electronic versions are permissible, but again, the courts prefer the hard copies versus the electronic versions. They want to see the actual signatures and chops on them. How difficult is it to terminate an employee in China? It is extremely difficult to terminate. Okay. There has to be valid reason behind why you're going to terminate somebody. Now, one of the issues that I had personally when I started off in China was the fact that my first hire, excellent on paper, but from an attitude point of view, kept becoming more and more demanding and complaining more and more about the company and that it wasn't growing fast enough. Well, you're not going to grow overnight in China, which is why I'm saying you need a generalist, you need a believer, and you need somebody with grit. And if you don't have that, then like me, I actually decided to terminate the individual because I had to hire 2 people at a certain point. I decided to terminate that individual because I did not want that attitude to be passed on to the second employee. So I rocked the boat, and I rocked the boat a little bit too far because I didn't have a true reason for terminating besides saying, you're not a right fit. And unfortunately, that's not a valid reason under PRC labor law. So I did not consult with a labor lawyer at that time, with my payroll agent. I just followed what we did in the head office in terms of procedure, which backfired tremendously. And in the end, I had to pay a very high termination compensation, which legally I did not have to do. All right. So terminations are complicated. Get advice before you terminate anybody so that you are not wasting money out of your budget and that you have the leverage because you have the knowledge about how to get that done. Is a fixed term employment contract permissible? Yes, it is. In China, you can have 2 fixed term contracts, but then the third has to be an open-ended contract. And of course, you can always start off with an open-ended agreement. Is an employee handbook required? It's technically not by law required, but it is strongly recommended because the handbook in the end of the day is your policies book, is your HR policy guideline. And the most important chapter in that guideline is breach of contract or providing warnings because of attitude issues, right? If you have 2 times attitude issues with somebody and you issue 2 warning letters, on the 3rd warning letter, you have the ability to terminate the candidate. And you need your employees to be able to read this handbook, understand it, sign off on it, so they know the rules and regulations about your HR policies in the company. And don't do that once you have 5 employees. Do that at the beginning when you have that first employee, so you have those guidelines in place from day one. Does the Chinese law differ from province to province? It does. Not extensively. You have a universal Chinese labor law, but there are small little intricacies that will be implemented province to province, even city to city. So it is important to be aware of what those little intricacies might be in those locations. How do employment matters impact transactions? They are big. So for example, if, I was explaining on the Tuesday webinar, if you set up a representative office and you're going to switch to you cannot switch. You then set up a limited liability company. You've got to transfer all of those employees. That's what I mean by a transaction. You're going to move those employees from one entity to another. And it can impact your business because they might say, oh, well, now I have to sign a new contract. Let's renegotiate. Let's discuss a new salary package, right? They might take that opportunity. If you're selling your company or if you're getting a new investor, this may impact your employment situation and your employment matters. So it really depends on what type of transaction it is, but just be aware that you need to take that into consideration before you do anything. Understand what you're capable of doing in those transactions with your employees. Is a non-unionized foreign company affected by local labor unions? They are to a certain extent. It really comes down to how many employees you have on staff. If you've got more than 30, then actually a trade union could be established within your organization if somebody pushes for it. But if you've got less than 30 employees, there is no need to have a trade union. But just note that, if you've got one person who's pushing to have a trade union, you might be required to set one up. And then are there other hiring alternatives besides direct employment? Yes. So you've got labor dispatch, which is done by local Chinese HR agents. You've got part-time employment. You've got independent contractor employment agreements. But with independent contractor employment agreements, they actually need a company of their own to be able to initiate that. And then you've got employer of record services, otherwise known as POs, which is the most common method to hire individuals if you're not planning on setting up your own entity in China. So I do want to explain what the employer of record service is, because there are a lot of people that are in this phase where they want to hire people on the ground before actually establishing something on the ground. Why do they want to do that? Because they might want to test the market. All right. So 2 things to remember. If you hire a mainland Chinese employee that's residing in China, then they must pay social insurance and income tax to the various tax and labor authorities in China. If you hire a foreign employee that is residing in mainland China, don't forget that the first thing you have to obtain is the work permit that they are working for your organization and that their residence visa is valid. They also have to pay personal income tax and social insurances. If you don't have an entity in China, then you will have to use an intermediary entity to hire those individuals. So you can say, I want my supplier to do that, I want my distributor to do that, or I want a PO or an employer of record company to do that on our behalf. Why would you use an employer of record service? Like I said, it could be because companies required to onboard local staff to handle ground operations in China. Like I said, you can't go to China alone. You will need people on the ground, okay? But you don't necessarily have a strategy yet for setting up a company. You need to hit certain triggers to push you to set up that company, all right? And this staff member is hopefully gonna reach those triggers when you do, all right? You might wanna test the market, hire somebody locally who's going to do market research, marketing activities, exploration activities. You might have companies with overseas-based contractors that wish to be based in China to fulfill projects that are going to occur in China. So it's going to be on a part-time basis. Or if you intend to register an entity in China and you intend to do that now, but actually in the meantime, you found a candidate that you don't want to lose, then maybe for an interim period before the formal establishment is completed, you hire this individual for, let's say, 4 to 6 months. And then once the company is established, they get transferred over. So that's why you would use an employer of record service, whether it's by a company, an agent that actually offers the service, or whether you use a supplier, a distributor, or an external third party that you are actually transacting with. The disadvantages of the employer of record service or utilizing an intermediary to hire individuals in China. One is stability. One is stability and sense of belonging. How do you expect an employee to have true grit, be a true believer, if they are not employed by a company with your name on it? How can they have a sense of vision and long-term career development if they don't have that? So you may find that candidates don't accept roles because of that. The other is it might not be easy to hire employees because some of them might not be willing to be employed under this type of employment method. They don't feel comfortable. They're worried that they might not get paid. And obviously, due to the pandemic, why risk changing jobs if there's no security? Then the employment contract will follow, obviously, the intermediary. It won't be tailor-made to fit them. So again, this might bring a bit of anxiety, doubt about what's going on. And then also the employment contract term has to be less than a year. Has to be a minimum of a year. And as a consequence, they might say, oh, you know, we want an open-ended agreement, or we want a 2-year contract, or they might start negotiating around that. You can imagine the sense of these employees, right? They want stability. They want to have security. They're not going to change jobs if there is none of that, especially now that there's been a pandemic, because a lot of people have lost their jobs. So to sum up, the advantages of using an employer of record service: fast market entry. You've got a legal and HR team who's managing all of it. You've got the same company doing the payroll services, the same company doing the employee onboarding. You're going to remain compliant in China, so you're doing things legally, and there's going to be cost savings for your market entry because you're not actually establishing an entity yet. This is how the relationship looks like. You've got the employer of record, which is the service company or the intermediary. You've got the client overseas, and you've got the employee. There's a co-employment relationship. And basically, there's a service agreement between the client and the employer of record. There's an administration employer, meaning there's a formal contract between the employer of record and the employee. And ultimately, the employee is reporting to the client overseas. They're the operating employer. Okay? So that's how it works. Now, I can't finish this presentation without emphasizing something that is very critical. You've gone through the pain of finding candidates, selecting candidates, negotiating with candidates, choosing a mode of employment for those candidates. But now you've got to help them settle in. Now comes the onboarding. And this is where many foreign investors, because they can't get to China right now, somehow are not doing this step properly. And I just want to, the onboarding is probably the most critical and vital function to provide stability and security to your new employees, your first hires. Okay? You got to imagine, you're sitting in the US, you're sitting in Canada, you're in the UK, you're in Australia, in Germany, in France, wherever it might be. You're not near your employees in China. You can't travel there yet. How are you going to onboard them that they get excited for your vision, that they become believers, that they get the grit and the motivation. How? Remember, the hiring process doesn't end on the day that they start working for you. It's not mission accomplished. Mission accomplished is when you hit growth in your organization and you're building that momentum and it's not stopping. That's when it's mission accomplished. There is still so much time, resource that has to be spent on developing these candidates, promoting these candidates, pushing these employees. They're no longer candidates, they're now employees. And you got to remember that settling into a new company takes time. You can't have an introduction meeting where they fly over to you. It's not working at the moment, right? So when you have a new employee that's either mainland Chinese or an expatriate or foreigner that's never worked for you before, maybe has never worked for a foreign investor before, you got to tie them down and communicate with them daily. There's a statistic in the market by employment experts saying that it can take up to a year, if not more, for a new employee to be fully productive within an organization. And by organization, I mean a foreign invested company. I don't want to waste 12 months. I want an employee to be productive from day one. And in order for them to get productive from day one, you have to hold their hand from day one. Accompany them on this journey. Do it through Zoom calls, do it through WeChat, do it however way you want to do it. But make sure you do it. Just don't do it through emails, because emails are becoming obsolete in China. It's by conversation, by direct communication. All right? Don't underestimate this. And like I said, for me, my goal is to get people productive from day one. So there has to be training. There has to be guidance. There has to be support. Because now that you've hired them, you have to retain them. Like I said, mission accomplished only happens once you are on that climbing path of building momentum to achieve growth and hit your KPIs and your targets, or even go over those targets and KPIs. But you've also got to maintain them and retain them. And this is the difficulty in China, because one, there is no support. A lot of foreign investors provide no support and guidance or training. It's clear to see. Number two, they don't maintain communication. So you've got a person sitting out in China with a 6 to 12 hour time zone difference and no communication. He's like, what am I going to be doing all day? Like I'm asking for approvals. Nobody's approving. It takes weeks for me to get approvals. This isn't how a company works. If China is the market that you want to grow in, then take it seriously and guide them in the first 2 years of the organization, or until you feel they're independent to fly. But how can they feel independence if you don't give them operational guidelines and system processes to follow? You want these first hires to create a sense of culture, philosophy, mission as you start hiring additional people. Because that's the atmosphere you want to create in your organization. And you can't imagine how many companies just don't do this. All right, it's so important. The onboarding and everything that comes after that. Don't underestimate the time resource that is required to do that. So what is the conclusion for today, right? The topic today is about creating a solid HR foundation, okay? We need to set very clear and realistic goals about what we want to achieve in 3 to 5 years, and we want to act on those. So we have to have very strong goals, which we have to pass on to the team. And we need to pass it on to the team, but we have to maintain that grit, desire, and motivation in order to keep retention high, okay? We have to have a very clear strategy and have the discipline to actually implement everything. And a key fact, vital point, is that these first hires are going to be the bridge between the head office and the China organization. You are creating a system process guideline with these first hires about the communication that is involved between headquarters and China. You need that bridge to be so solid so that you have support on both ends to be able to build that momentum and grow in China. If that bridge is not strong, it's going to collapse. You're not going to grow, and ultimately you might exit the Chinese market because blame is going to be sent all around. These first hires are really the ones that are going to build that foundation and then build that bridge to the HQ. In the HQ, it's highly recommended to make one of the individuals there head of China or be responsible for the Chinese market. But more than responsible for the Chinese market, they should be leading the team on the ground. And they should be doing it from day one that this first hire is on the ground. Okay? If you don't have that person, then it's chaotic. There's just chaos everywhere. You can call this person the project manager, you can whatever you want to call them. But they have to be in charge of the communication and the building, whether it's a technical guy, whatever it might be. If you start, ensure that you are committed. I would suggest that you reflect back on yesterday's webinar where I was outlining how to communicate and how to start your business with your Chinese accountant. The guideline that I provided at the end of that presentation can be replicated with a general manager, with a Chinese general manager, with a Chinese sales manager, BD manager, whatever. Okay. And in there, I've highlighted to develop recurring meetings, weekly, monthly. Because as soon as you are committed and you do this type of work, you will see results. But if you flake around and you're not committed and you don't join these meetings and you don't push to have these meetings, it's not going to work. You're not going to work well in China. Just won't. You won't have transparency, clarity. You won't provide guidance. The folks in China will do things on their own because you're not giving them anything. And then illegal things might happen that you then have to fix at a later stage, which means you're spending time on fixing things versus growing. And last but not least, just to emphasize here, if your organization in China isn't producing results, which it should, because we're talking about one of the single largest markets on the planet, results should be seen, right? If you're not seeing those results, most probably it's stemming from the team that you have on the ground. And you need to act now. If you wait and you don't want to rock the boat, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to get ahead of that growth opportunity. You've got to react now. So if you don't have the right person, you don't have the right fit, and you're finding that out 2 months, 3 months, a year and a half, fire them. Get a replacement. Have a backup. Okay, because we want to build momentum to get ahead of that growth opportunity. And the people on the ground are the ones who are going to push that forward. There's a saying from Warren Buffett, which I really love, that I've added here at the end. No matter how great the talents or efforts, some things just take time. You're not going to be successful and be profitable overnight in China. Okay? You can't produce a baby in 1 month by getting 9 women pregnant. You can produce a baby by getting 1 woman pregnant and waiting 9 months. Meaning, you can be successful in China with 1 employee, but giving them the time, the guidance, the effort, the support, like you would a pregnant woman, and getting them ahead. Pregnant women need support. They need training. They need guidance. So do your employees on the ground. And again, remember, it doesn't happen. That baby doesn't come overnight. Love this quote from Warren Buffett. So, Donna Lynn, I know you're the only one on here, so I'm going to finish off quickly. But if you do have any questions or you want to share your takeaway, please do add that into the chat box. That is the end of today's session. Here are a couple of ways you can work with me in terms of HR, creating your HR foundation. One is through recruitment, employer of record services. We provide templates for employment agreements and handbooks. And then we also do payroll simulations, breakdowns for social insurance and housing fund. And then we also provide payroll services as well. You can always book a strategy session with me, Donalyn. You've got my contact details anyhow, so I won't exit from the screen. But if there are any questions, I'll stay on for a couple of minutes. So far, nothing's popped in. But we've got one last webinar, which is tomorrow, all about choosing the right people for your corporate management in China, because I know that is a pain point as well and does stop people from moving ahead with their China projects. So we're going to touch on that tomorrow as well. There's still nothing that's popped in, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for joining me, Donalyn, and for anybody that's watching this on replay, I hope you enjoyed. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Take care and goodbye.